Hey guys, it's Nolan. If you don't already know, I'm the one who designs all of the Amadama Kendamas, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the design evolution, how we got to our final design. So you've probably already seen our final design, the one that we're currently on, but we haven't really talked much about the intermediate designs, what it took to get there, and where we started, so just want to talk a bit about that. Okay, so we started in June 2023 with V1, and so for V1 the material we decided to use was PLA, because PLA is the most common 3D printed material, very cheap, very easy to get your hands on, and we wanted to get a smooth finish on the Kendamas, try to smooth out a lot of the layer lines from the printing, and to do that we wanted to use epoxy. So we tried coating everything in epoxy, which was not too bad, pretty nice, but the problem was that it was hard to get a consistent finish. You can see some pretty obvious areas where the brush strokes are pretty clear, and areas where there's a thicker layer of epoxy than others, so overall it was pretty hard to get a consistent finish on the entire Kendama. The other problem was that the epoxy layer would dry up and then crack pretty easily, so after just a few tricks you could already see cracks in the epoxy, and that was a pretty big problem. And the last thing about V1 was the shape. So the shape was pretty clunky and pretty garbage overall in retrospect. You can see we had a very thick base of the sword compared to a very thin tip of the sword. And so that was inspired by older designs, older Kendama designs. We were looking at papers, looking at schematics from several years ago, and by then the community had already moved on to wanting different designs with much bigger cups and a bigger sword. So the shape was a problem along with pretty much everything else with the V1. So a few months after starting V1, we realized we had to go back to the drawing board and redesign everything. And so that's when we came up with V2 of the Kendama designs, which you see here. So the first notable difference is that we added the logo to the base of the sword, which was pretty cool and kind of in a way that you couldn't do with traditional methods. That has to be 3D printed, so that's a unique thing about the Amadama Kendamas. And so first we tried adding the full logo, but the small letters in the logo weren't easy to read and were just looked pretty garbage, and so we moved on to just including the D of the logo, so we'll call this V2.5, and that's something we've stuck to ever since. Another main difference with V2 was the material. We moved on from PLA and changed the material to ABS. The problem with PLA was that it has a relatively low melting point, so sometimes if you leave the Kendama out of PLA in a hot car or just on a hot day, you could actually see the shape slightly deformed, and that's why we chose ABS, which is much more resilient to those high temperatures. The other advantage of ABS is that we can smooth it out using acetone. So whereas with V1 we tried smoothing it out with epoxy, which had a lot of issues, V2 we can smooth it out with acetone, and it works pretty well to remove those layer lines, give it a nice clean, smooth, reflective finish, and that's what we've been doing ever since. And the notable thing too is that instead of smoothing out the entire part, we actually kept a grain on the ridges of the cups and at the base of the sword, and so that makes it easier to do stall tricks with the friction from those natural layer lines. The shape also changed a bit. The overall length was the same as V1, but we changed the shape of the base a lot, made it more concave instead of convex. That allows your thumb to fit nicely in the groove, whereas the V1 felt kind of clunky holding it. And the cups also got a bit larger, the profile changed a little bit. Overall, not too many changes to the overall dimensions, just a bit bigger cups and a slightly different shape at the base. And that was V2. So once we finalized the design for V2, we sent it out to a few people for some initial testing, and the results we got were a bit mixed. Overall, people liked the idea of having different shapes that they can mix and match and screw onto the sword, but the main criticism we received was that they were too light and they were too small overall. They felt very fragile. And so we took this criticism, went back to the drawing board, and came up with V3 of our design. So of course the main change between V2 and V3 was the overall size and shape of the Kendamas. So we increased the sword length to 6.8 inches, which is a very common size you see today with Kendamas, and we also increased the diameter of the cups to, again, more common sizes that you see today. So on top of changing the shape, we also changed the weight. We figured out basically how can we get an 85 gram standard Ken, which is kind of an average weight that people are used to with Kendamas these days. So what's nice about 3D printing is that you can change the infill, basically how much of the print is filled with material versus just air. You can change that between 0% and 100%, which gives us a lot of control over how much the total weight comes out to. And so we figured out how to get our medium weight kendamas to exactly 85 grams. And what's nice with 3D printing is that we can do different weights as well. So we figured out how to get a light option around 60 grams, and by increasing the infill to almost 100%, we're able to get a 100 gram standard Ken that still has a perfect center of rotation. And so for people who want to try out something heavier than wood, than you can achieve with wood for the same shape, this gives you an option to, again, try out something heavier. So yeah, that was the design evolution from V1, where we started a year ago, to V3, where we are now. And so we're not exactly done yet. We wouldn't say this is completely finalized. There's still a few changes we want to make it overall a bit stronger, less prone to breaking, and just overall a bit cleaner. But to do that, we need your help, and that's why we're launching a Kickstarter this Friday, coming up soon. And by contributing to that, you can essentially order the kendamas ahead of time. And so once our campaign gets fully funded, we'll be able to really go in and finalize the design completely, make those small final changes we want to make, and then send them out to all of you guys as a reward for helping us get there. So yeah, I hope you guys can check that out, and thanks for watching.